Hey guys, how we doing? Chris Lamort. Here we are doing worksheet number 5, English Renaissance. Renaissance, translated, means rebirth. We're talking about a rebirth in philosophy, exploration, culture, transportation, astrology, medicine, and inventions. Everything's going back to the beginning. A little bit of background information for you here. The church, which was so prominent during the Middle Ages, began to weaken. Because later on, three different people claimed to be Pope, the head of the Catholic Church. And once you've got that kind of dissension going on, you have factions breaking out saying, I'm going to go with this person, I'm going to go with this one that I believe, I'm going to go with that one that I believe. That one stable government that was the Catholic Church began to crumble. They moved the seat of the Pope from Rome to Avignon, France for, I think it was almost 70 years. And then they moved it back to Rome. So people didn't know who to believe, and they lost, the Catholic Church lost credibility. So people said, you know what, I'm not going to go with that way, I'm going to go my own way. Also, during this time, we have Martin Luther, who was a priest, a German priest, went to Rome and saw how things were being done there and said, you know what, we're doing it wrong. Everything I thought I was doing through the Catholic Church is not what I want to do. And he went and he nailed his proclamation up on the door of the church and started the Reformation and Protestant religions. So they definitely called into question what was going on with the Catholic Church. Our concept for this lesson, worksheet number 5, is man's universe. We have the rediscovery of the concept, man is the measure of all things, which goes back to the Greeks. We talk about the theory of the 3 spheres of man. This is not in your book, so I'm glad that you're watching this video. First, what man does himself affects himself. Also, the second part of that, what man does affects his immediate society. Such as, we'll take an example as Oedipus. Oedipus was trying to flee from his parents because he didn't want to kill them and marry his mom and do all that stuff. So he left, but he didn't get out of the road. So this guy coming toward him and kind of road rage, leant over, hit the guy, killed him, and that affected not only him but also the people around him, because he went to the next kingdom and they didn't have a king. He answered the riddle of the Sphinx, became king, married the queen, and had children and everything like that. So that decision that he didn't want to get out of the way affected himself, his immediate society, and then unbeknownst to him, it was his mom, and everything trickled down from there. Also, that choice also, on the third point, affects the universe as well. Because Oedipus didn't get out of the road. He ended up marrying the woman who was queen, and found out later on it was his mom. Also, then he plucked his eyes out because he couldn't believe what he had done. And he left Creon in control. And Creon went and got himself and the country into a war, and then borders moved. All because Oedipus decided not to get out of the road. So Hamlet does the same exact thing. First, what he does affects himself, then it affects everyone around him, and then ultimately it affects the universe. And that's, kind of like if you drop a rock into a pool, you'll see the ripple effect. It'll fan out from there. So your actions live on after what you've done is the concept of what we're talking about here. A little bit of background information for you. The government during this time, it was Henry VIII, who was married 6 times. He was married 6 times, trying to get a male heir to sit on the throne when he passes. And he was married to Catherine of Aragon, and he wanted to get a divorce. Catholic Church said, hey man, you can't do that. He said, I'm king, I can do whatever I want to do. And they said, no, you can't do that because you said, for better or for worse, to death do us part, you got to see it through. It's a sacrament. And he said, you know what, I'm the king, I can do whatever I want. In fact, hasta la bye-bye. So he bid farewell to the Catholic Church for the country of England, and he established the Church of England. He was married to Catherine of Aragon, not Oregon. Aragon, and he granted himself a divorce. Let me use my cheat sheet real quick. Then he married Anne Boleyn, and she did not give him a male heir. He had her beheaded. He married Jane Seymour. She died in childbirth. He married Anne of Cleves. He got a divorce. He married Catherine Howard, had her beheaded. And then he married Catherine Barr, and she is the one of the 6 wives who survived. Elizabeth I was one of his daughters, and she took over. They went from Henry VIII to Edward VI, and he died at the age of 15. Queen Mary, also known as Bloody Mary, took over. There was a squabble there, and then Elizabeth I was she took the throne. She followed the same policies as her dad, Henry VIII, and that's my point. Elizabeth I comes in and says, I want to do things the way that my dad did. And you have, the upheaval from the Catholic Church. You have the Reformation. You have the Church of England being established. Also, most of your audience at this time was not educated, so people would use theater to educate and also sway opinion of the populace. So Elizabeth steps in and she says, you know what? I got to tell you something. No more plays about politics. No more plays about religion. You can do whatever you want from there. People are like, well, what are we going to write plays about? We can't do that. She said, that's right. I've censored everything else. You can't do religion. You can't do politics. Just like when you go to a dinner party, the last thing you're supposed to talk to people about are politics and religion because people have such strong opinions about them. So the writers are scratching their heads saying, where do I go? What am I supposed to do? So they go back to the classics. They go back to the Greeks. They go back to the Romans. And that's where we have this renaissance in literature. So Shakespeare goes back. He looks at the plays of Terence and Plautus and Seneca. They go back to these sources. They read them, and then they, call them their own. Because Comedy of Errors is basically a retelling of a play by Plautus. As I said, people would use theater as propaganda, and they said, you can't do that. We'll have no more plays about politics or religion. They went back to the Greeks and Romans for inspiration. In the beginnings of the English Renaissance theater, we had the Inns of Court. Inns were the places where people stayed. Court were the royal court. They were places where lawyers would study and also live. And for entertainment, they didn't have any TV or movies back then. They would go back and they would read plays that they learned about in school. And they would perform these plays since there was no other entertainment for them to do. With this, we have the emergence of the public theater. And they looked at it like theater was a business. There was no financial help from the government at this time. Public theater, let me just reiterate, public theater is not the same thing as the Inns of Court. Inns of Court was basically academics, some very smart people doing it not for profit. Side note, public theater is for profit. It is a business, and it is what people dedicate their lives to do. And they take a lot of their principles from the Middle Ages and the staging. I'll talk about that in just a little while. During this time, there is a playwright from Stratford-upon-Avon who emerges, and his name is William Shakespeare. Now, for all intents and purposes in this course, William Shakespeare, the man from Stratford-on-Avon, who moved to London and is credited with writing 38 plays, is the person who wrote those plays. There is a couple of ideas out there that he did not write these plays, but for all intents and purposes, he did write these plays. He was married to a woman by the name of Anne Hathaway, who I believe was 3 years older than he. And 6 months after they were married, they had their first child. You do the math. He also was the son of a glove maker and moved to London, became a writer and an actor and a producer. So he got paid as a writer, he got paid as a producer, he got paid as an actor. I'm going to ask you a couple of things. Give me an example of one of the tragedies that he wrote. Romeo and Juliet, Othello. What else do I ask you? Julius Caesar. Macbeth, which is the name of a play you're not supposed to say in a theater because they believe it is cursed. There's a witch in there, Hecate, and then also there are witches, the three sisters, the witches, also start off the play, double, double, toil and trouble, and there's a spell incorporated in there. So they call it the Scottish play. Hamlet, of course, Antony and Cleopatra. Those are some of the tragedies. Comedies. He wrote actually more comedies than he did tragedies. And with that, we're talking about A Midsummer Night's Dream, Much Ado About Nothing, The Tempest, Two Gentlemen of Verona, Comedy of Errors, Love's Labour's Lost. I can go on and on and on. All you can have my list right there. The Taming of the Shrew, Winter's Tale, Merchant of Venice, Love's Labour's Lost, I think I said. And then also we have the history plays, which are called histories because they are the English histories. Now, even though Julius Caesar is history, they consider the history plays to be about the English throne. And with that, we get King John, Richard II, Richard III, Henry IV, parts 1, 2, and parts 1 and 2, Henry V, Henry VI, parts 1, 2, and 3, and then Henry VIII as well. The reason we still teach Shakespeare today is because he was incredible. Also, his plays have a universal theme. Even though they were written 400 years ago, they still have prominence today. They're still relevant today. People are still going through the same things today. So even though they were written then, we still have boys and girls falling in love who aren't supposed to be together because their parents don't like each other. We still have people who wish that they could, take somebody else's place in society. We still have stories about jealousy and rage. Even though they're written in Old English, in Shakespeare's English, we can still get the message because it still resonates with us today. It's very important. Sometimes they updated the costumes and the props, but they leave the language the same. And usually it takes you about 5 or 10 minutes to watch a Shakespeare play or movie, and you're like, I have no idea what they're saying. This makes no sense to me. But after about 5 minutes, 10 minutes, it clicks in. And then your ear kind of picks up the last syllable of every other syllable, which resonates with you, which is really cool. So if you're watching a Shakespeare play or movie, give yourself 10 minutes, and then your ear will click in, and it should resonate a little bit easier for you. Shakespeare wrote in blank verse, iambic pentameter. Iambic pentameter is 10 syllables per line, an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. So it was bum 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 bum, and there's always that accent every other syllable. He wrote this way because it was easier for his audience to hear it and understand. He was writing for the low class, middle class, and the upper class. So he wrote it with that hook for his audience to understand and make it accessible for all of his audience, and do it that way. Blank verse means the last syllable of the line does not rhyme with the next last syllable of the next line. And he used blank verse for his tragedies and his histories. Rhymed verse, the last syllable of the line rhymes with the last syllable of the next line. He did this for the comedies because it's funny that way. To him it was, and to his audience as well. And then he also wrote in prose, which was everyday speech. And there are times in different characters, your lower class character is going to speak in prose. Your upper class characters, your serious characters, excuse me, that's how I have to wrap this up. His upper class characters, smarter characters, talk in blank verse, and then his comic characters speak in rhymed verse. All right, so I'm going to wrap this one up, and I'll catch you in just a second. Thanks.